All right, people. Final episode this week. I think that this has been a pretty solid week. I've enjoyed these last few episodes, even though we're recording this a little bit early on my side. Now, I was still waking up at the beginning, but now we're firing on all cylinders, folks. We are absolutely firing on all cylinders. And this one we're talking about how to craft a good offer with decent margins. So we've talked a little bit about. We have one of the kind of flagship episodes of the Ecom Dispensary is our episode about how to come up with an irresistible offer. So we talked about some of this stuff before, but I think this is a bit more of a specific way to think about it. So this is inspired by a question from an Ecom Dispensary member who shall not be named. We do know who it is this time, believe it or not, but he shall not be named. So question is as follows. After you've narrowed down and are ready to launch a new product, how do you go about crafting the best offer? What is the thought process that you follow? Is the price range relative to other similar products in the market or mostly based on your cost of goods sold? And since initial testing from AliExpress will potentially produce different margins than once you order bulk, how do you go about figuring out how many pieces to order while still getting ready to scale, in parentheses, under 500 a day in ad spend? And does that change your offer / margins, et cetera, et cetera? Pretty solid question. This is obviously from someone who has some ecom experience. And yeah, I thought this was a good one, man. I thought this was a good one.
Yeah. So where do we even start?
Where do we even start?
How do
I
we
guess
go
we'll
about
start from the beginning. How do you go about crafting the best offer? What is the thought process?
I don't think the price range is relative to other similar products in the market. I mean, it kind of is, but I think it's more so based on the cost of goods, because we'll look at what is the cost of goods for this. Can we sell this for ideally 3x or more total cost to customer? So product cost plus shipping cost from Ali to customer in the US. Can we sell it for 3x that or more? That is kind of the first question we look at and think about. And then, of course, we do then think about, is this somewhat competitive? Does this make sense?
Yeah.
So if you end up selling a product,
we don't really base the pricing as much off of other offers, other brands that are selling similar products in the same market. But we do look at that to determine, all right, based off of these cost of goods, this is the range that we're looking to sell it in. Is this a realistic range? Like, is this double what people are used to paying for this? If it is, then we probably wouldn't do it. But if it's somewhat within the range where, similar products are selling for, I mean, generally, I think you're just kind of looking for, are there products that are being sold for less than this? Are there brands selling it for more than this? If you can find, some on both sides, then I think generally it's probably okay. You just don't want to go into a situation where, there's definitely a handful of products, and this isn't really that rare in my experience, where the prices on AliExpress are just way too high. Like the price on AliExpress are more comparable to like the prices on Amazon than they are to the prices on like Alibaba or like ordering in bulk. And, there's plenty of reasons that can happen. But if that's the case, then, if we just think, okay, like there's a very low chance that, people are generally used to paying $40 for this and we'd have to sell it for 80. And in that situation, then we probably would just move on and do something else.
Yep. So based on cost of goods first, and then once you sort of 3x that, you have to ask yourself, is this at all reasonable or not? But we're not looking at what is it sold for on Amazon and then going up or down from that. You can't be getting into a competitive bidding process with Amazon sellers. You've got a different business model, different margins. They're essentially mostly selling organically, I believe. Of course, there's Amazon ads too, but the ROAS in those is way different to Facebook. So you've got a different business model, different margin structures. You can't be trying to compete with Amazon sellers on price in most cases.
Yeah. And that's pretty standard. I mean, I feel like for most of the products we sell, there's generally going to be multiple listings on Amazon that are selling it for cheaper. And that's not a huge deal, as long as it's not like a huge discrepancy.
It's also a case of not just, are there people selling the exact same thing, but are there people selling a solution to the same problem for much cheaper? And then there's also, it doesn't actually matter if it's available on Amazon for free. It wouldn't matter unless people knew that. It only matters if people are aware that it's cheaper elsewhere. So there's some products where people have an idea of what it costs, and therefore it's going to be very hard to sell it for more because people are aware of what it quote unquote should cost. Whereas if you're selling whatever you're selling and people need to go on Amazon to specifically search it out and it's not readily available in their mind, that can still work. That can still work really well.
Yeah. That is very true. That is very true. So moving on through this question, since initial testing from AliExpress will potentially produce different margins than what you order in bulk, how do you go about figuring out how many pieces to order while still getting ready to scale?
That is really hard. Probably depends whether you're using an agent in the transition period or whether you're going straight from initial testing to bulk order to the US. I would say if you're going to do a bulk order to the US, probably want to order about a month's worth of inventory and then order another month's worth of inventory 2 weeks later. It just depends how much money you're willing to put up for that first bulk order. It's so tough. I would err on the side of smaller orders and do more of them. I was talking about this with another guy in the Telegram group. I don't see any reason to be making huge orders right off the bat when it's like, okay, I'm planning for this to last me for 5 months. I would rather see you place an order for 1 month or 6 weeks of inventory and place another order 2 weeks later before the original order even arrives. Just stagger them out a bit instead of placing them all at once.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's probably good advice. That's honestly a pretty tough thing to figure out, like your exact amount of units. It's very situation dependent. It's just based on, how much money you're willing to put up, what your risk tolerance is, what your goals are with this, with this brand, this new store that you have. It just depends. It depends. I think you definitely want to, like Scotty was saying, err on the side of caution. You do not want to make the mistake that I have made in the past of ordering like $100,000 worth of inventory right off the bat. Like that's just not a great move.
Definitely not. There's just no reason.
So I do want to talk about this as well. He talks about how margins from AliExpress versus margins when you're ordering in bulk or margins when you're using a dropshipping agent can obviously change. We've had some internal debates about this kind of thing, whether or not when we're testing a product and we're looking at the results and trying to decide if this is something that's, working well enough for us to justify going on to these next steps of moving to a dropshipping agent, of placing a bulk order and shipping it to the US. We've had this debate where should we use the AliExpress margins or should we use the margins that we think we can get when we order in bulk? Generally, I think up to this point, Scotty has made it pretty clear that we can't use magical margin calculations that don't exist. So I think it's probably a pretty decent point. It's actually weird, like with this new brand that we've started fairly recently, the cost of goods has actually gone up from switching from AliExpress to using a dropshipping agent, which I thought is kind of interesting.
That's definitely unusual though. I think that's rare. What you will see is going from China shipping to US shipping where the price increase is there because you have to ship it in bulk first and then you have to do the individual shipping again in the US. So that's not uncommon for, this is the thing where when you start off with Ali, what I don't like is when we're like, okay, we're going to test an offer at this price point. I ask about margins and people come back to me with, well, the margins aren't great right now, but when we place an order in bulk, it's going to be fine. That's kind of where we get into this magical thinking where our margins will dramatically change when we order in bulk. And it just doesn't really work out because you save some on the unit cost. You definitely save some money on the unit cost, But then due to the bulk shipping plus the individual shipping, especially with shipping rates at the moment, if you're doing air shipping to the US, you're just not going to save a ton of money, if anything. So I really think your alley margins are, although imperfect, a pretty good estimate for what your margins are going to be like when you ship from the US at the end of the day. Not in all cases, but in terms of an estimate, it's not bad.
Yeah. I would agree with that. I would agree with that. And then I guess, kind of the original question here is how to craft a good offer. Um, the way that we go about this is honestly, I mean, it's basically just you start with, okay, so what are my margin constraints? Because obviously the concept of coming up with a good offer, you have to do that within the constraints that your margins kind of present you. So you got to look at your margins and be like, okay, so with these margins, what offers could I actually do that will, because, the first part of it, the offer has to work with your margins. So that's kind of the first part. And what I do is I just kind of just brainstorm ideas. Like I'll just write down, I did this a few weeks ago for this new brand that we have. I just wrote down, okay, so what are we getting it for? What's the margin on 1 units, 2 units, 3 units, etc. And then I just tried to come up with as many ideas as I could that would actually work within the constraints of our margins. So, we could do 1 for this price. We could do 3 for this price. We could do buy 2, get 1 free at this price. Et cetera, et cetera. And just come up with as many different ideas as I can. And then break down, like what I did is I came with all these ideas and then did the margins breakdown. So what does this end up working out to in terms of gross margin? And then, I just kind of look at them and just see which of these looks like the best deal, like this is the cool thing about coming up with offers is I feel like it's pretty intuitive. Like, even if you don't have a whole lot of experience with ecom, you know what a good offer is and what isn't, because you can tell by looking at it. Like, you can just kind of know, is this a good deal or not? Does this seem like it's a good value for the money? And some offers are going to be yes, some offers are going to be no. And you want to find the offer that kind of seems like it's the absolute best deal, but also works with your margins. And that's kind of a balance figuring that out, because obviously the quote unquote better offer you make, most of the time what that means is the lower your margins are going to be. So you kind of have to balance those two things out and find the thing that kind of meets in the middle and is the best on both ends.
Yep. That's where it's less intuitive, where, okay, gross margins are higher, but how much is my ROAS going to drop? And that's not only counterintuitive, but I would say pretty hard to estimate. A lot of the time that does require testing.
Yeah. Yeah. And then ultimately, like, you just got to test. You got to test the offers. You're not, when you choose an offer, you are by no means married to that offer. I think you should always be testing different offers. We've changed on our main brand. We've changed our offer multiple times, tested different things, raised the price, lowered the price, structured it differently. And I think that's a very good thing to do, because it's probably the easiest and like quickest big test that you can run. It takes, it can take all 5 minutes to change your offer, but it's a huge change and it could result in dramatically different results. So that's kind of a big part of our testing process, honestly, is testing the offer. Like, I feel like with just about every brand or every store that we start, everything that we test, every new thing that we test, the offer it's almost always in there. It's almost always one of the things that we're testing.
Yep. That about it?
I reckon so. You just we kind of start with the cost of goods. What can we do in terms of our cost of goods, working within those constraints, come up with a bunch of ideas for different offers that might be able to work, and then narrow it down to 1 or 2 that you think are going to kind of perform the best. Test them out. Don't be using no magical, non-existent margin numbers from things that may or may not happen in the future. Just work with the margins that you got. Work with what you got. And then once you got something working, start transitioning to building a real brand, man. Get out of the dropshipping phase as fast as you can. I think that's probably a pretty major key if you want to build a long-term sustainable brand. And that is the gist. That is the good word. You got anything else to add, Scott, man?
I do not. I think that's about it.
Beautiful. Well, folks, we hope you enjoyed this week's knowledge drop. As always, if you have questions, comments, concerns, things you want us to talk about in future knowledge drops, let us know in Telegram. Let us know in Telegram. We are more than happy to make the episodes that you guys want to hear. Let us know, and we'll talk to you guys next week.